But now, there is a new young workforce. Those born 1978 and later are now, are you ready? 25% of the workforce and growing. The youngest people in the workplace today in North America were born in, are you ready for this? 1995, with a note from their parents. Right? So where were you in 1995? Right? Oh, I was in a room like this, in this building, at a meeting like this. Right? They were getting born. Okay? So, and that's now 25% of the workforce and growing. Sometimes people will stop me at this point. Somebody will stop me at this point and say, wait a second. Haven't there always been different people of different generations working side by side? Well, I was young. Why are we talking about this now? There are three things that are different about generational difference in the workplace today. The first one is what we call the numbers problem. And here's the numbers problem in a nutshell. On one end of the spectrum, the workforce is aging. On the other end of the spectrum, the workforce is getting younger. And in the middle, the prime age workforce is shrinking as an overall percentage of the workforce. So over here, on the older end of the spectrum, you have what demographers call the age bubble. The population is getting older, and that means the workforce is getting older. And of course, you all deal with this in your business from an actuarial standpoint, but it also affects human capital management. The age bubble is growing. But on the other end of the spectrum, the fastest growing segment of the workforce is those born 1978 and later, and they are filling up what we call the youth bubble. And in the middle, there's a gap. So in the age bubble, you have the collective skill, knowledge, wisdom, institutional memory, relationships, and the last vestiges of the old-fashioned work ethic. What are we going to do when they start leaving? Now, good news, we're having a depression. So it may be that they'll never be able to retire. Thank goodness. I mean, what would we do if they started leaving? Skill, knowledge, wisdom, institutional memory, relationships, and the last vestiges of the old-fashioned work ethic. That is the value proposition that lives in the age bubble. Over here in the youth bubble, there's a whole new attitude coming to work. And in the middle, there's a gap. And the numbers problem has implications for the whole range of human capital management issues. So on the oldest end of the spectrum, the issues are knowledge transfer and flexible retention. On the youngest end of the spectrum, the issues are attraction, selection, onboarding, up-to-speed training, performance management, rewards, incentives, and a different kind of retention issue. The retention issue on the younger end of the spectrum is what we call the development investment paradox. And here's the development investment paradox. It goes like this. You bring in talented young people, you have to develop them. The more you develop them, the more valuable they are. The more valuable they are, the more they're in danger of selling your development investment in the free market to the highest bidder. And you say, oh, well, you know, everybody's keeping their cards close to the vest right now. Yeah. So what you need to be worried about is what we call the pent-up departure demand that is building up in the youth bubble, soaking up your development investment. Got to worry about that. Now, in the middle, the big issue is mid-level leadership and bench strength for senior leadership, because so much of the day-to-day supervisory burden occurs in the middle of the spectrum. And that's where there's a lot of people who are in positions of supervisory responsibility, they just don't do any supervising. They want the business card, but they don't want the day-to-day hassles of managing. The other big issue that occurs along the whole age spectrum is career paths. What is your career path going to look like? How can you plan a meaningful career path in this environment? All of these issues are affected by the numbers problem. That's the first thing that's different about age difference in the workplace today. Here's the second thing that's different about age difference in the workplace. There used to be a very simple way of sorting out age difference in the workplace. It was called the seniority system. Here's how it worked. You see, the older, more experienced people were in charge, and that's how it worked. The younger, less experienced people did as they were told. And it worked like a charm. right? You were supposed to hitch your wagon to the star of an established organization, pay your dues, climb the ladder, do as you're told, keep your head down, keep your mouth shut. And you don't make demands of your boss on day one. You wait for your boss to notice you. You wait for the system to take care of you. And sink or swim, son. Figure out what to do. If nobody tells you what to do, just figure it out. Do it anyway. You wait for us to reward you in the long term. See, but the old-fashioned seniority system is breaking down nowadays for two reasons. On the corporate side, it's breaking down because it's a fiercely competitive world with increasingly narrow profit margins. Now, I don't know if you've spent a lot of time in boardrooms lately, but I have, and there's only one thing being discussed, and that is preserving profit margin in this fiercely competitive, uncertain world. And when that's what's going on, the imperative becomes productivity and quality. And the definition of productivity and quality is get more work and better work out of fewer people. See, when that's what's going on in the boardroom, it matters less and less where people have been and what they've done, and it matters a whole lot more what can you do for us today, tomorrow, and this week. And for that reason, the seniority system is breaking down on the corporate side, even in old-fashioned companies. But it's breaking down even more on the employee side, because nobody trusts the system to take care of them in the long term anymore. Least of all, the youngest, least experienced people. And if you don't trust the system to take care of you in the long term, you start looking to your immediate boss to take care of you in the short term. And that is high maintenance. Because it's not like the managers can be like, more for everyone. Oh, you want something? Here you go. Right? Because we're operating in a resource-constrained environment. So it's just too easy. More for everyone. It just doesn't play out that way. And that is a high-maintenance situation. Now, that's the second thing that's different. Seniority system is breaking down. Here's the third thing that's different. We're all living through the most profound changes in our economy, society, culture, and workplace than any time since the Industrial Revolution. And that's true whether you're 25 or 55. But depending on where you are in your life and career, you're probably experiencing these changes differently. And that's why we find looking through this generational lens can be so enlightening. We first stumbled onto this generational lens by accident in the early 90s. And here's why. Back in the early 90s, there were a bunch of young people coming into the workplace too. And back then, the young people were Generation X, those born in 1965 to 1977. So let me just do a quick poll of the room. How many people in the room were born 1965 to 1977? Raise your hands. Okay, me too. We are the prime age workforce. By the way, those of you who were born, one more time, raise your hands. Okay, so I have something special to say to you, and that's just, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry you were born during those years. I apologize for using the term Generation X. We gave up our fight against the term Generation X when the United States Census Bureau started using it. For full disclosure, I should tell you, I was born in June 1967. For the baby boomers in the room, that was the month that Sgt. Pepper was released. Little perspective. Okay. But think back to the early 90s, okay? Back in the early 90s, we were the young people coming into the workplace. And think back. Are you thinking back? Yeah, okay. So when we were coming into the workplace, the older, more experienced people were looking at us and saying, you got some attitude, kid. Remember? Right? You're disloyal, you have a short attention span, you don't want to work as hard, you demand immediate gratification, you want everything your own way, and you want it right now. Remember? Sound familiar? See, there's a long-range term of art we use to describe this phenomenon. We call it kids today. And sometimes people say to me, well, wait a minute. Is this new young generation really different? Or are they just young? How much of this is just about the life stages that everyone goes through? One of the things we do in our research is we try to look at where do the natural life stages intersect with the accidents of history that make each generation a little bit different. Because what makes each generation a little bit different is just a bunch of accidents of history. So Gen Xers, we were the young people in the early 90s. And the accidents of history that shaped us were we grew up in the 70s when society's great institutions were being discredited and they were faltering. Cities and schools, the police, the military, religious institutions. When Generation Xers were growing up, the message was, you're on your own, kid. You can't rely on institutions to take care of you. And Generation Xers were the great unsupervised generation. We made the latchkey into a metaphor. Because our parents were more likely to both be working, our parents were less likely to stay married, and parents in the 70s just tended to be more permissive. And then when Gen Xers got into the workplace, it was the late 80s and the early 90s. Remember what was happening in the late 80s and early 90s? Think back. It was downsizing, restructuring, re-engineering. And so when Gen Xers got into the workplace in the late 80s and early 90s, the message rhymed with the message we had when we were growing up. You can't rely on institutions to take care of you. When we were coming into the workplace as a generation, the message was, you'll have to take responsibility for your own success. And then they were surprised when Gen Xers were like, oh, you want me to take responsibility for my own success? Well, I don't want to work on Thursdays. And can I bring my dog to work? And the older, more experienced people said, well, where do you get this attitude? But whose idea was this? See, it wasn't Gen Xers. Whose idea was this?